Today's story is all about the ongoing situation in the world, the tariffs,
Tariffs.
We're leading because of tariffs.
the retaliation,
Well, China is imposing retaliatory tariffs against the U.S.
the ongoing wars,
Russian forces launched more than 500 drones and missiles at Ukraine.
the blame game,
India's purchases of Russian oil are financing the conflict in Ukraine.
the stronger standpoints,
Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems. But the world's problems are not Europe's problems.
the trade,
Futures are trending down again this morning. All major indexes closed in the red yesterday.
the sanctions,
The U.S. and Western allies are stepping up pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin with more economic sanctions.
the old and new relationships, and the economy.
What is the outlook for growth in 2025?
It's all circling around four countries: the United States, China, India, and Russia. As President Trump returns to the White House, the tariffs have returned too, and this time Trump is not going easy on the world. He is fierce and ruthless. Despite his heavy-handed approach towards everyone, China is openly retaliating against his policy, while India's standpoint is stronger than ever before. This story is going to cover and explain everything: the rising prices from groceries to tech products, and how the Ukraine-Russia war has impacted the entire world, the tariffs, and the possible new trade pacts and policies, and most importantly, President Trump. Yes, Mr. Donald Trump. A larger-than-life personality, 79 years old gentleman, returned to the Oval Office for the second time as the President of the United States. He never disappoints us. Every other day, he is on the headlines of the news channels and on the front pages of the newspapers across the globe. He is such a personality, you may hate him or you may love him, but I bet you cannot ignore him because he is everywhere. He has been struggling with many issues simultaneously, like negotiating with Russia, trying to stop the Ukraine-Russia war. He even claims to have prevented 6 potential wars in the last 6 months across the globe, and has openly suggested he deserves a Nobel Prize for maintaining peace in the world. We'll come back to that. After all, it's only been 6 months of President Trump's return to the Oval Office, and there is more to come. He has been creating barriers for many different products entering the American market, ranging from furniture to laptops, mobile phones to cheap Chinese EV cars. There are several reasons behind these moves, such as India's purchase of crude oil from Russia, which he describes as supporting the Ukraine war, and China being the United States' stronger competitor in business, leading the world in exporting goods across the globe. But to truly understand these tariffs and the policies and the standpoints of these major countries, you need to go deeper down into the history and economy, how global trade has been evolving in the past and in the present. Then you will understand everything that is happening today. Hello and welcome. I am Shanmugam Pillai, and today it's all about American history.
Time with precocious truth and wisdom prime, and mama thought with Farah's might, and showed the world what's truly right. From Ashoka's peace to Shivaji's roar, Chanakya's brain that built the core. Ariyabhata, Ramanuja lit the skies, the loving missiles fly so high. Trendy walked, Subhas lit bold, and Petka's law and Nehru's goal. From Sindhu's smash to Sachin's fame, it's engraved deep in India's name. I'm here to say stories of such millions, because it's all about India's.
Before we begin to understand these countries' economy and countries' standpoint, I want you to understand the technicalities of trade, how trade happens between two countries, how different currencies works, and how the market behaves. The first major technical term is foreign exchange, which is also known as Forex, and the second is Forex reserve. Foreign exchange is the backbone of global trade. Every international transaction, whether it's India buying crude oil from Russia, the US importing electronics from China, or Russia selling gas to Europe, everything passes through Forex. Forex is not a physical exchange like stock market such as Nifty or New York Stock Exchange. Forex works electronically through a network of central banks, government, commercial and investment bank, brokers, multinational companies, investor and hedge funds, and retail traders. Central banks and governments are the biggest player in the foreign exchange because they manage forex reserve. I'll tell you about this in a while. The central banks of countries are RBI, Reserve Bank of India, US Federal Reserve for US, People's Bank of China, and Central Bank of Russian Federation. Second biggest player are commercial banks and investment banks. These banks are like engine of the foreign exchange, where actual transaction happens, whether as an individual is transferring money or a company purchases or sells. These banks facilitate cross-border transactions. Total transactions around the world through these banks are in trillions of dollars. It's about $7.5 trillion in a day. Third is Forex brokers. These are the middlemen who connect individual traders and smaller institutions with big banks. They provide platforms like an app or software. For example, some of the brokers are Zerodha, FXCM, IC Markets. They earn through commissions on trade that happen on their platform. Fourth biggest player in this Forex network is MNCs. These companies do export and import goods and services, like Apple sells iPhone in India, earns in rupees, and needs to convert in dollars. And similarly, Reliance imports oil in dollars, needs to convert in rupees, so their demand for foreign currencies to pay or sell moves the foreign exchange rate. Foreign exchange rate is what a country's currency worth against another country's currency, like rupees against dollars. Currently, it's about 87 rupees against $1. Fifth biggest players are institutional investors and hedge funds. Huge financial firms like BlackRock, Bridgewater Associates, Vanguard, Citadel, they trade currencies as investments. Betting on whether the dollar, euro, or yen, their trades can create big swings in exchange rates. Sixth player are retail traders. They are people like you and me investing our money through trading platforms. We don't bring much bigger change in the market because we are much smaller as compared to the banks. So now you understand what Forex is and how foreign exchange works. But now understand what Forex reserve is. Countries keep large stockpiles of foreign currencies known as Forex reserves. These reserves are physically held in different countries in different forms, like foreign currencies mostly held in US dollars, euros, Japanese yen, and British pounds. Second is in the form of bonds. Foreign government bonds like US Treasury bonds or German government bonds because they are highly liquid, easy to sell, and considered secure. And third is in the form of gold. And gold is mostly stored in countries' own vault, like RBI's vault in Nagpur and Mumbai. But globally, the gold is stored in the UK with Bank of England and Federal Reserve Bank of New York. India's reserve in foreign banks is around $650 billion in different forms. Similarly, China's reserve is $3.2 trillion, which is the most in the world. US reserve is around $250 because its currency is already liquid and a major currency, so it doesn't need much to keep in reserve. But if you see altogether, all these countries are keeping their reserve in US dollars, and it constitutes about 60% of the total reserve. Russia reserve is around $580 billion. Most of it is frozen due to sanctions. So Russia shifted its reserve away from US dollars into gold and Chinese yuan after US sanctions. So this reserved currency, they are used to pay for imports, repay international loans, or defend the currency if it crashes. Now, why US dollar is mostly used in trade instead of other currency? That you will understand later in this video because it involves economic history. For now, there is one more thing you should understand, that is how tariff can affect foreign exchange rate. Meaning, for example, since the tariff has hit, the rupee weakened from 86.8 rupees to 87.9 rupees against a dollar, then recovered to 87 rupees since the tariff hit. So, a country's exchange rate depends on these factors. First is balance of trade. Meaning, if China exports is greater than its import, that means surplus currency is in reserve, resulting in strengthening of Chinese yuan against dollar. Second major factor is economic growth and stability of a country. Strong GDP growth attracts foreign direct investments. Example, India's rapid growth often supports long-term rupee demand, even though short-term pressures weaken it. But it might not affect India in larger picture. Third is public debt. High government debt makes a country risky, and that means investors demand higher returns or avoid it. That means it weakens the currency. Example, Argentina's peso or Turkey's lira demands very less. Sanctions and trade pact. War, sanctions, and political instability results investors pull their investment out of the country and move towards stable country for good returns and currency drops, and resulting in currency drops. Similarly, trade pacts like BRICS, SAARC, and GCC, these trade pacts either reduce their trade barriers or even bypass dollars and trade in their own country's currency, and this strengthens the country's currency against dollar. Russia sells oil to India in rupees or yuan instead of dollars, so it reduces the demand of US dollars globally. This is the path of de-dollarization trend. Relative strength of other currencies. If the US dollar strengthens globally, other currencies like Indian rupees, euros, or British pound fall even if their economy hasn't worsened. And the last is tariffs. It's a trade barrier and a geopolitical move. That is, imposing tariffs means high cost on imported goods, resulting in low demand, thus export falls and weakens the currency. And also, if a country revert back with similar tariffs like China did, results in a trade war between two countries. This impacts investment as investor pulls back their investment from country to avoid risk in returns, which again results in fall of currency. But why this trade war like situation has arrived? During colonial rule from 1600 to 1776, America was solely an agrarian economy until the Industrial Revolution in 1800s. But during this period, Britain controlled trade through the Navigation Acts, forcing the colonies to sell mainly to Britain. This economic restriction was one of the main reasons for the American Revolution, which later led to the independence of America. America mostly exported tobacco, cotton, indigo, and rice to Britain, and imported finished goods such as textiles, tools, and tea. During that time, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were major landowners who made most of their profit selling tobacco and cotton. And merchants in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia also grew richer from shipping and trade. In the 1700s, America wasn't a single country. It was 13 British colonies along the Atlantic coast. These colonies were Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Each colony had its own local assembly, but was under the authority of British Crown. Colonists were mostly farmers, traders, and craftsmen. When I say colonists, it doesn't mean Native Americans. They were the settlers from Europe, mainly British, Germans, and Dutch. And from Africa, they were mostly slaves. European settlers came from various social classes with motives ranging from seeking economic opportunity, religious freedom, and political liberty, to escaping the hardship in their homelands. These settlers established new societies, eventually developing a distinct American identity. In the late 1760s, Britain taxed the colonies heavily to recover money lost during the European wars, especially the French and Indian Wars that lasted for 10 years from 1754 to 1763. Britain taxed newspapers, legal documentation, and many other things in 1765 under the Stamp Act. In 1767, under the Townshend Act, taxes were imposed on imported goods too, such as glass, tea, and paper. In 1770, when colonists were protesting against the imposed tax and began boycotting imported British goods, the Boston Massacre occurred. British soldiers opened fire on colonists, killing 5 people. This incident sparked anti-British feelings. Later, in 1773, the Boston Tea Party incident took place. This was a crucial turning point in the history of American independence, when colonists, dressed as Native Americans, dumped imported tea chests into the harbor in protest. Britain punished Boston by closing the harbor, which triggered the American colonists of 13 colonies to unite against colonial rule. France later joined America in the war in 1777, and in 1781, with the help of French Navy, the final battle was won. They trapped British General Cornwallis, who surrendered. He is the same Cornwallis that later became the Governor General of India in 1786. Then in 1783, Britain officially recognized the independence of United States in the Treaty of Paris. Till today, you see the French President Emmanuel Macron sitting beside the US President in public meetings. The US and French relationship is about 250 years old. America was in war debt, had no national banks, and its currency was unstable. France and Netherlands supported the American Revolution. George Washington was elected unanimously in the first election in 1789 with all 69 votes, becoming the first president of independent America. John Adams became the vice president. George Washington was sworn in as a president in Federal Hall in New York City. He served 2 terms from 1789 to 1797 and stepped down voluntarily, setting the tradition of the 2-term limit. Alexander Hamilton, a notable leader of the newborn America and the first US Treasury Secretary, founded the first Federal Bank of America and established the banking system. He pushed for the industrialization of America and imposed tariffs to protect US industries. The first ever tariff in America was imposed in 1791 and was introduced by Hamilton to protect its new industry from foreign manufactured goods. Samuel Slater, another key figure in American history, known as the father of American Industrial Revolution. He brought British textile technology to America. Slater was a British citizen who migrated illegally to America in 1789 because Britain had law banning skilled textile workers from migrating. Since he couldn't bring the blueprints of the spinning machine with him, he memorized the design of the British spinning machine, and in 1790, with the help of an American merchant named Moses Brown, built the first successful water-powered cotton spinning mill in Rhode Island. Another key figure was Lowell Mills, who pioneered large textile factories in Massachusetts in early 1800s. But Thomas Jefferson opposed industrialization and Hamilton's push for it. Jefferson believed that the strength of the United States lay in independent farmers, not in industrial workers or merchants. His philosophy is often called Jeffersonian agrarianism. He believed farmers were self-reliant, virtuous, and free-thinker because they owned their land and lived by their own labor. In contrast, he saw factory workers as dependent, tied to wages, and vulnerable to exploitation. Similar to serfs in Europe, he feared that industrialization would create a class of urban poor, leading to corruption, inequality, and loss of liberty. When America declared independence in 1776, it broke free politically, but economically it was still fragile. The new nation had been heavily dependent on Britain for manufactured goods, while the colonies mainly exported raw materials like tobacco, cotton, and fur. The trade was disrupted because Britain imposed restriction on American goods. Despite this, the US began laying foundation of a market economy, focusing on agriculture in the south and small-scale manufacturing in the north. Alexander Hamilton's financial plan, which included creating a national bank in 1791, was crucial for stabilizing the early economy. The United States also resumed shipping goods from Boston and New York. Now, moving forward to America's Industrial Revolution, an industrial setup period from 1800 to 1860. Year 1800, America was young, 24 years old, and Thomas Jefferson was elected as the president in the same year. Population was about 5.3 million and mostly farmers. Economy was 80% agriculture-based, exporting cotton, tobacco, and food to Europe. There was nothing as such for transportation. The dirt roads and horse-drawn wagons. The trade was slow and costly. Slavery was legal in the South, providing cheap labor for cotton and tobacco plantations. But in early 1800s, an important invention happened, first time in the history of America, by a mechanical engineer named Eli Whitney. He made a cotton engine, which was commonly known as cotton gin. The machine helped in separating seeds from the cotton, and that made the cotton seed separation 50 times faster than the manual work. And this boosted the American cotton export to British textile mills, and that made the southern landlords richer. But as the cotton export rose, farmers produced more and more cotton, and with this, they all brought in more slaves into farming. Till 1860, America contributed world's two-thirds of the cotton alone, and alongside, the slaves grew from 700,000 to 4 million. As Samuel Slater founded the first textile mill in Rhode Island, and that launched the textile industry in New England. His system was called the Rhode Island system. He employed families with children often working in the mills. And in 1820s, similar textile factories were set up in Massachusetts by Francis Cabot Lowell, who visited Britain, studied textile mills, and brought back ideas. He hired young farm women called Lowell Mill Girls to work in the textile mills. They lived in dormitories, worked 12 to 14 hours a day, and this was called Lowell's system. They produced cloth cheaper than imported textile, and America became self-reliant in textile. Industrial revolution was not just limited to textile. Robert Fulton launched the first commercial steamboat in 1807, which made transportation easier and faster as compared to goods being transported through the dirt road on horse-drawn wagons. Later, in 1825, Erie Canal connected the Ohio, Great Lakes to Hudson River. New York City became the trade capital of America. Farmers in the Midwest could cheaply ship crops to the East. In 1827, the first railroad was laid, connecting Baltimore to Ohio. The merchants and bankers chartered this railroad because of Baltimore was losing trade to New York City, which had just built the Erie Canal. Here's an interesting fact. Don't think that on these railroads trains used to run. On the contrary, horse-driven wagons were first used on these railroads. But soon America invented its first steam engine, designed by Peter Cooper, an inventor and businessman. This sparked the demand of train transportation system. America constructed 30,000 miles of railroads till 1860s, more than any other country in the world. This new transportation system fueled industrial revolution and made United States a rising giant. Industrialization in the north, the railroad factories, textile and canal works attracted migrants from Europe. Millions of immigrants came, mainly Irish and Germans. Irish, especially after the Great Famine of 1854. They worked in construction, canals, railroads, and as factory workers. Germans, on the other hand, brought skills in farming, brewing, and craftsmanship. Many settled in the Midwest. Cheap immigrant labor was the fuel for industrial growth. In the year 1816, Second National Bank was set up that supported industrial revolution. But in the year 1829, Andrew Jackson became the president, and he hated the banks, called it corrupt, and vetoed its renewal. This caused unstable money supply. Resulted the Panic of 1837, a financial crash, widespread unemployment, and bankruptcies. The Depression lasted about 6 years. In March 1837, after Andrew Jackson, Martin von Buren became the president, and he ended the Depression. Unlike modern times, there were no Federal Reserve, no central bank, no stimulus package. The recovery was messy and long. President von Buren introduced the independent treasury system in 1840, which separated government funds from private banks. This reform reduced future risks but didn't immediately end the depression. Hundreds of banks collapsed. The weak financial institutions were wiped out, leaving only the stronger banks that held real spices, means gold and silver. This painful cleansing stabilized the financial system gradually. By the mid 1840s, thanks to the cotton recovery, trade revival, and westward expansion, the economy was back on track. Prices for land, cotton, and food fell sharply, wages also dropped, but this eventually made America exports cheaper abroad. Slowly, trade balance improved, attracting gold and silver back into the US economy. Though depression didn't stop new inventions. Samuel Morse invented telegraph in 1837 that helped instant communication across states. Cyrus McCormick built a mechanical reaper in 1831, which boosted grain farming. John Deere invented a steel plow in 1837 that allowed farming of tough prairie soil. Today, John Deere exports its tractors and farming machineries to the world. India also purchases John Deere's tractors. Charles Goodyear made vulcanized rubber in 1839. First, it was used for shoes, belts, and later tires were made of vulcanized rubber. These inventions revolutionized farming, communication, and manufacturing. Growing industrialization in the north and plantations and farming in the south sparked the difference between them, which resulted in the Civil War in 1861, the bloodiest war in American history. From 1860 to 1900, America was in total chaos. But by the end of the century, it emerged stronger with new industries, inventions, reforms, and an improved banking system. By 1860, America had expanded to a total of 33 states, out of which 18 were free and 15 were slave states. The southern states formed a union they called the Confederate States of America. They believed states had the right to govern themselves, including maintaining slavery. The Northern insisted the Union must stay stronger under federal authority. The Civil War broke out between the slave and free states. Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States in 1860, a year before the Civil War. Southern states saw his presidency as a threat to slavery. Jefferson Davis led the Confederacy and Abraham Lincoln led the Union. The Civil War lasted 4 long years. The Union in the North had an industrial economy that boomed by supplying weapons, uniforms, and railroads. Women worked in factories. The Union war effort forced the North to build at scale uniforms, rifles, rail, locomotives, ironclads, the telegraph wires, and canned food. To pay for it, Lincoln's government created the first modern federal finance system, greenbacks, a national banking system, an income tax, and a protective tariff called moral tariff. You can see that in a crisis, tariffs were imposed again to protect the economy, similar in concept to the tariffs by Donald Trump. In 1862, President Lincoln signed the Homestead Act. Before the Civil War, much of the land in west of Mississippi River was still unoccupied, was unsettled by Europeans or Americans. Native Americans lived there, but the US government wanted farmers, railroads, and businessmen to occupy it. To encourage settlement, the government passed the law to give away land almost for free to citizens and immigrants who promised to live on it and farm on it. Anyone over 21, man or woman, including freed slaves and immigrants intending to become the citizens, could apply. Each homesteader received 160 acres of land. The government gave millions of acres to railroad companies. These companies sold land cheaply to settlers near the rail lines, so more people would move west and use trains. Union Pacific and Central Pacific built the Transcontinental Railroad, which was completed in 1869, opening huge areas for farming and trade. Though farming was tough because of droughts, grasshopper plagues, and harsh winters, which caused many to give up and return east, but millions stayed. Towns grew rapidly in Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas, Oklahoma, and farther west. For Native Americans, this was devastating. Their lands were taken by homesteaders, miners, and railroads. By 1890, the Census Bureau declared that the frontliners line no longer existed. After 1900, very little free land was left to give away. After the Homestead Act of 1862 came the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. President Lincoln declared enslaved people in rebelling states free. The war became about slavery as well as union. Railroads were used extensively for troop movements, creating an early military-industrial link. During the Civil War, the Confederacy in the South faced severe shortages of food and goods due to Union blockades, and the Southern economy collapsed. Many enslaved people fled to Union lines. After 1863, nearly 180,000 black soldiers served in the Union Army, and civilian life suffered too. Families were torn apart, and there were over 620,000 dead in total. In 1865, the Union won and took control of the southern states. On April 9, 1865, the Southern force, led by General Robert E. Lee, surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Union forces. The supremacy of national government over the states was confirmed. 5 days later, on April 14, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. Finally, in December 1865, the 13th Amendment was ratified, abolishing the slavery. The 1870s brought America great industrial and economic growth. A Scottish immigrant named Andrew Carnegie founded Carnegie Steel in 1870. Andrew Carnegie is among the 1% of personalities I personally admire. Story is inspiring, and his autobiography shows incredible penmanship. Carnegie Steel powered American railroads and other industries with cheaper steel, and the steel business also made Carnegie the richest person in the world. J.P. Morgan supported the foundation of American industries with banking and finance. By the 1880s and 90s, he was not just a banker, he was seen as the man who controlled American capitalism. Morgan became the powerful private banker in America. He reorganized bankrupt railroads, bringing order to chaos. He applied Morganization, forcing smaller competitors to merge, cut costs, and stabilize industries. Another powerful figure was John D. Rockefeller, who founded Standard Oils in 1870 and gained control of 90% of oil refining. Cornelius Vanderbilt was the backbone of America's railways and shipping. The 1870s were not just about industrial growth, they were also about inventions that changed the world, the technologies we still use today. In 1879, Thomas Edison invented the incandescent light bulb. Edison promoted DC electricity, which was safe for shorter distance but inefficient for longer ones. Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse promoted AC electricity, which could travel long distance cheaply using transformers. Factories installed electric motors, replacing the steam power. The lighting expanded working hours and nightlife. Appliances such as early fans and irons entered homes by 1890s. In 1896, the first major AC plant at Niagara Falls supplied electricity to Buffalo, New York. America looked like a golden land of wealth, railroads, skyscrapers, steel, and inventions. But beneath the surface, there was deep corruption, inequality, and exploitation. Government jobs were given as reward to loyal party member, not based on merits, encouraging unqualified people in the power. A fake construction company set up by the Union Pacific Railroad executives overcharged the government by millions to build the transcontinental railroads. Railroads became the biggest source of corruption, bribing lawmakers with free stocks, cash, or luxury trips in exchange for land grants and favorable laws. Judges were bribed to rule in their favor during bankruptcies. Distillers and federal officials conspired to cheat the government out of millions in whiskey taxes. Presidents were often weak compared to business tycoons. Politics became almost synonym with bribery, backroom deals, and thefts. Politicians sold influence, businesses bought laws, bankers manipulated markets, and ordinary people had to play along. As industries bloomed in late 1800s, conditions for workers were brutal. They worked 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Wages were barely enough to survive. Dangerous workplace like explosion, cave-ins, fires, and no safety laws. Kids as young as 8 working in mines and mills. No job security, as workers were fired easily and blacklisted if they protested. This created the labor movements starting as early as in 1869. The Knights of Labor founded the first major labor union. In 1877, the Grand Railroad Strike occurred, violent nationwide protests. In 1886, American Federation of Labor was founded by Samuel Gompers, focused on skilled workers. 1892 Homestead Strike in Carnegie Steel, Pittsburgh. In 1894, Pullman Strike that paralyzed railroads and that was crushed by federal troops. Strikes often failed because business had huge advantages. The support of government, troops, courts, politicians, and media painted strikers as violent radicals. But each strike built awareness, sympathy, and pressure for reform. The 8-hour workday wasn't yet won, but it became a central demand. Union membership grew to 500,000 by 1900. The AFL became dominant and laid the groundwork for 20th century labor rights. By 1900, the US had become the largest industrial economy in the world. In 1901, the financier J.P. Morgan created the first billion-dollar corporation by combining Carnegie's Mill and others into US Steel. The US steel production overtook Britain's in 1890s, and by 1900, the US was producing about 10 million tons of steel compared to Britain's 5 million. The US Standard Oil under John D. Rockefeller controlled about 85% of the world's petroleum refining. Railroads, on the other hand, by 1900 had over 193,000 miles of track, the largest network in the world. This tied the economy together and enabled mass distribution of products. Agriculture was transformed into a mechanized farming using tractors and reapers, and that made America a breadbasket. It exported huge amounts of wheat, cotton, and corn. The population was around 76 million, almost double Britain's 40 million. Immigration: millions of Italians, Irish, Jews, Germans, and Eastern Europeans were arriving annually, providing cheap labor for factories, railroads, and mines. The long hours and low wages was a constant in the working class life, but productivity was skyrocketing. Economy of US in 1900 was around $20 billion, which was around 24% of global GDP. And Britain's economy, on the other hand, was only about $11 billion, around 9 to 10% of the global GDP. This meant the US had already surpassed Britain as the world's largest economy by the late 1890s. But Britain still had a stronger financial system, banking power, and global empire. In 1903, an ambitious Detroit manufacturer named Henry Ford organized the Ford Motor Company. His cheap and rugged Model T was introduced in 1908, and more importantly, the moving assembly line that began in 1930 at Highland Park, that re-engineered working style, wages, and American landscape. His vision of making affordable cars for ordinary Americans, not just the wealthy, set him apart and led to the Model T revolution in 1908. Just like Ford, another breakthrough happened in 1903. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, achieved the first controlled power-sustained flight with their Wright Flyer in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Politics shifted towards reform. Theodore Roosevelt became the president after William McKinley's assassination in September 1901. President Roosevelt launched the Square Deal. That meant he challenged the Northern Securities Railroad Trust and won a Supreme Court breakup in 1904. He regulated railroads in 1906. He championed consumer protection by introducing Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906 and Meat Inspection Act 2. He also worked for conservation of nature. He set aside millions of acres for national parks and forests. Although inventions and industrialization boosted America's economy in the early 20th century, something exciting also happened. Hollywood emerged after the invention of motion picture camera. In 1891, Thomas Edison invented kinetoscope, a peephole machine for one person at a time to watch moving images. But in 1895, Lumiere brothers in France created the cinematograph, which could record, develop, and project film. In Paris, December 1895, the first public movie screening happened, which was considered the birth of cinema. In America, in 1903, The Great Train Robbery by Edwin S. Porter was screened, the first narrative film with story. In 1905, first Nickelodeon Theatre in Pittsburgh was opened for public, and movies became mass entertainment. And the end of the decade was marked as the rise of Hollywood. Filmmakers moved to California for sunlight and cheap land. Hollywood became the movie capital. The big five studios emerged: Paramount, Warner Brothers, Fox, MGM, and RKO. Stars of the silent film era included Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and Mary Pickford. Walt Disney too emerged as a cultural icon, revolutionizing entertainment with animation and creating characters and stories that became a part of American identity and global culture. In 1927, a jazz singer became the first feature-length film talkie with synchronized dialogues, revolutionizing cinema and the end of the silent era movie. Not everything was fun in 20th century. The worst was yet to come. Europe plunged into war and the World War I broke out in 1914. It began with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, on June 28, 1914, by a Serbian nationalist. But deeper causes were different. Militarism, countries had built massive armies and navies. Imperialism, rivalries over colonies in Africa and Asia increased hostility. And nationalism, ethnic groups like Serbs, Poles, and Czechs demanded independence. Central powers were Germany, Austro-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, and allied forces were Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Japan, and later the United States in 1917. At first, the US stayed neutral. President Wilson declared neutrality in 1914. Public opinion was divided. Many wanted to avoid European wars, but cultural ties favored Britain and France. Economically, American companies profited heavily by selling food, weapons, steel, oil, and loans to allies. By 1917, US banks had lent over $2 billion to the allies and only about $27 million to Germany, meaning America was economically invested in an allied victory. Key events that pushed America into war. In 1950, sinking of the Lusitania, torpedoed by German submarine. 128 Americans were killed. In 1917, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, and in 1917, the Zimmermann telegram. Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico against the US, promising to help Mexico regain Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. On April 6, 1917, the US declared war on Germany. Wilson said America would fight to make the world safe for democracy. The US raised an army of 4 million men, with 2 million sent to Europe under General John J. Pershing. The arrival of US Army boosted the Allies' morale. During the World War, factories converted production, meaning Ford, General Motors and others shifted to trucks, ambulance and engines. Campaigns like Meatless Mondays and Meatless Wednesdays were popularly run across the country. The Liberty Bonds raised the fund around $20 billion. Women entered the workforce in large numbers and African Americans migrated north in the Great Migration. By 1918, the US became the world's largest war supplier. American forces helped turn the tide in 1918, pushing Germany to request an armistice. On November 11, 1918, armistice was signed. Wilson proposed his 14 points, including self-determination, open diplomacy, and a League of Nations. But the US Senate rejected the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and America never joined the League, shifting to isolationism in 1920. The impact of the war. The war costed around $330 billion till 1918. Casualties were 10 million soldiers died, 20 million wounded, and millions of civilians lost their lives too. US economy surged, producing 40% of the world industrial output by 1920. Electrification spread. Radios entered homes, refrigerators and washers moved from luxury to aspiration. During 1920s, cities boomed, but wages lagged behind profits. Common Americans bought goods on credit, and farmers suffered from falling prices due to overproduction. There were other issues too in 1920s, like Red Scare, the fear of communism after Russian Revolution, the Ku Klux Klan's revival. They targeted blacks, immigrants, Catholics and Jews. The Immigration Act of 1924 that restricted Southern and Eastern Europeans and banned Asians. In 1923, Calvin Coolidge became the president. His famous statement during that time was, "The business of America is business." The stock market took off. Many bought stocks on margin, but on 29 October 1929 it collapsed. It was remembered as Black Tuesday. Banks failed, businesses closed, and millions lost jobs. That was the beginning of the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover was elected as the president just before the crash. And by the end of the decade, the booming US economy plunged into the Great Depression. It wasn't just a slight downside on the American economy. It was a huge economic disaster. Stock market speculation was rampant. People borrowed money to buy stocks and means buying on margin. On Black Tuesday, the stock market collapsed. Millions of dollars in value vanished. Many banks that had invested in stocks failed, wiping out people's savings. Unemployment rate by 1933. Nearly 25% of Americans were jobless. Millions depended on soup kitchens, that is, charity for food. The Great Depression wasn't just the result of World War, which caused the low demand for American goods, but there are major reasons why the Great Depression occurred. Like bank failures, thousands of banks collapsed between 1930 and 33. There was no deposit insurance, means people lost all their savings. The stock market speculation. People borrowed money to gamble on stocks. When prices fell, debts couldn't be repaid. Global issues. After World War I, Europe was in debt to US. The US passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariffs in 1930, which cut off international trade that made things worse. Wealth inequality. Rich got richer, poor got poorer. By 1929, the top 1% owned nearly 40% of the wealth in America. The corporate corruption and scandals. During the 1920s and 30s, corruption was tied to both government and corporations, like Teapot Dome scandal in 1921. Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall secretly leased Navy oil reserves to the oil companies in exchange for bribes. This became one of the worst government corporate corruption scandal in the US history. Banking corruptions. Banks speculated with depositors' money in the stock market. When the market crashed in 1929, over 9,000 banks failed. Stock market manipulation. Wall Street insiders created pools to artificially pump stock prices, then dumped them on ordinary investors. Brokers encouraged buying on margin, that is, fueling dangerous speculation. Insider trading. No SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, existed yet. Corporate executives freely trade on inside information. Example, Richard Whitney, the president of New York Stock Exchange, was later jailed for embezzlement in 1938. Herbert Hoover, who was the president during the Depression, he believed in limited government intervention. He thought the economy would recover naturally. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932 to lend money to banks, railroad, and businesses. He opposed direct federal relief for unemployment, insisting on rugged individualism. His response was seen as too little, too late. The public blamed Hoover, and he lost the election to Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt became the most influential president of the 20th century. He served 4 terms, the only US president to do so. He introduced the New Deal in 1933, a series of programs to fight the Depression. Banking crisis in 1933. President Roosevelt declared a bank holiday to stop panic withdrawals and restore trust. Jobs programs like CCC, Civilian Conservation Crops, and WPA, Works Progress Administration, were to provide jobs to the people. He stimulated agriculture and industry through AAA, Agriculture Adjustment Act, and NRA, National Recovery Administration. To prevent future crashes, he introduced SEC that regulated the Wall Street in 1934 and FDCI in 1933 that ensured bank deposits, and Social Security Act in 1935 that gave pensions and unemployment insurance. The second New Deal came in 1935 that focused on workers' rights. Wagner Act in 1933 protected unions. Fair Labor Standard Act in 1938 set minimum wages and maximum hours. As things were gradually getting back on track by these reforms, but by 1939 America's economy was boosted again, even more faster than anyone had imagined. The reason was the World War II broke out. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland using a new strategy called Blitzkrieg. It means lightning war, with fast tanks, planes, and infantry. Just 2 days later, on September 3, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and that's what officially began World War II. Now remember, after World War I, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 punished Germany harshly. They had to pay huge reparations, lost territories, and had strict military limits. Add to that humiliation and global Great Depression of 1929, Germany was full of anger and poverty. That's why totalitarian regimes began rising. Adolf Hitler took power in Nazi Germany in 1933 and promised to restore German pride. Benito Mussolini, in fascist Italy since 1922, wanted to bring back a Roman Empire, and Japan, on the other hand, was busy expanding in Asia. Meanwhile, the League of Nations completely failed to stop aggression. Now fast forward to 1940, Germany quickly conquered Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands. With its powerful Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, and advanced army. By June 1940, even France surrendered. Between July and October 1940, the German Air Force stormed London in the Battle of Britain. Around the same time, Italy officially joined Germany, and Japan kept pushing into Asia. At first, the US stayed neutral, but it still helped the Allies. In 1939, under the cash and carry policy, Britain and France could buy American goods as long as they paid cash and transport the goods themselves. By 1941, the Lend-Lease Act let the US supply weapons and goods to Britain, the USSR, and China without upfront payment. But everything changed on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, destroying much of the US Pacific Fleet. And just to clarify, Hawaii was annexed by the US in 1898 and it became a US territory and later became the 50th state. Anyway, the very next day, America declared war on Japan. Soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the US. And just like that, America was completely drawn into the World War II. Then came June 6, 1944, the D-Day. US, British and Canadian forces landed in Normandy, France, opening a second front against Germany. By late 1944, the Allies had liberated France, Belgium and the Netherlands. But in December 1944 and January 1945, Germany launched its last major offensive in Belgium, the Battle of Bulge. The Allies held firm and Germany was permanently weakened, and on May 8, Germany surrendered after Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the US dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and on Nagasaki on August 9. And on 15th August, Japan finally surrendered, and this was the VJ Day, and the World War officially ended. Now here's what happened inside the US. Once it entered the war after Pearl Harbor, the economy shifted from depression to full mobilization. Military spending exploded from just 2% of GDP in 1939 to nearly 40% by 1945. In total, America spent around $300 billion. It's about $4 trillion in today's money. Factories underwent a full conversion. Car makers like Ford, General Motors and Chrysler stopped building cars and they produced tanks, jeeps, planes and ships. And by 1945, the US had made around 300,000 aircraft, 100,000 tanks, 2.4 million trucks and thousands of ships, outproducing Germany, Japan and Italy combined. The war created 17 million new jobs. Unemployment fell below 2%, wages rose and farmers' income doubled. With men at front, women entered the workforce in record numbers, raising female employment from 27 to 37%. African Americans also moved north in the second Great Migration to take up war industrial jobs. By 1945, the US had emerged as the richest nation in the world. Its homeland hadn't been bombed, it held 2/3 of the world's gold reserve, and it produced half of the global industrial output. World War II didn't just end the Great Depression, it made America the arsenal of democracy and a true global superpower. Women and minorities gained new roles, setting the stage for future social changes. And right after the war, people wanted to prevent another global disaster. So in April 1945, representatives from 50 nations met in San Francisco to draft the United Nations Charter. It was signed on June 26, 1945 and came into force on October 24. But there was already tension with Soviet Union. By 1944 and 45, the Red Army had pushed the Nazis out of the Eastern Europe and occupied countries like Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria and Albania. And with influence in Yugoslavia too. Stalin wanted a buffer zone of communist states because the USSR had been invaded twice by Germany in World War I and II. At the Tehran Conference in 1943, the Allies had agreed the USSR could keep influence in Eastern Europe if it helped defeat Hitler. At Yalta in 1945, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin agreed on free elections in Eastern Europe, but Stalin never honored that promise. At Potsdam, July 1945, Truman made clear that he distrusted Stalin, but by then the Soviets already controlled Eastern Europe. This set the stage for Cold War. The West feared further Soviet expansion, so NATO was formed on April 4, 1949. Its members were the US, Canada, and 10 Western European nations. The idea was collective defense. If one member was attacked, all would respond. NATO was meant to counter the Soviet Union, and in 1955 the USSR responded with Warsaw Pact, its own alliance of Eastern European countries. To strengthen NATO, the US stationed nuclear weapons and troops in Europe as a deterrent, and that's how, after the World War, the whole world got divided. This part of American history ends with the Second World War. In the next part, I'll take you through the post-war years all the way to today, so stay tuned and let me know in the comment section how you liked this video.